everyone, today I want to show you how to make a surreal landscape out of collage using found magazine images. So to show you some of my older examples, here's one that I made using pictures of pyramids with one picture in the foreground and then a second picture in the background, and those came out of an old National Geographic magazine. And then for the sky, I found a really cool picture of an aurora borealis that I included as well. So I used a foreground, middle ground, and background image to help create this imaginary landscape. Here's another surreal landscape example where I took some interesting pictures from the North Pole, layering them in with images of the polar bears in the foreground, and then combined some really large photographs of flowers and cut them and added them to the pictures as well, including this picture of a bird. I liked how this collage turned out because of the drastic change in scale, how big those flowers were compared to everything else. So there's another interesting example for you to take a look at. Now, to show you how to make your own collage today for your surreal landscape, you're going to need a couple of magazines, and I've already gone through the magazines that I have with me and pulled out a few pictures that I liked and thought could work well for this particular assignment. So I found this very simple, nice rolling hill landscape from just an old bridal magazine. I liked this particular picture of a chair from a home decorating magazine. This picture of the little kid coloring was really cute. I thought I could add that to a landscape somehow. And then I found that old vintage picture of an way oversized pen, which I thought would work well with the little kid. And then I found this nice 2-page spread from a car advertisement. And I like this picture too with the bird sort of flying in that heart-shaped formation. So I'm going to play around with these images and see if I can find a cool way to combine them in an interesting and believable way to make a surreal landscape. So my first step is going to be to cut these images apart, trying to decide what parts of the landscapes I think would be usable for my collage. So I'm sort of experimenting as I cut these out, seeing how they layer together. This is really just about kind of playing around with the images and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and really kind of thinking creatively and thinking outside of the box to figure out how to make these pictures work together. So now that I've gotten them cut out, I've kind of experimented to figure out the layout that I like for this. I think if I take this first piece and lay it over top of the cars, I can create my foreground and then remove anything down below that. And then I'll take this row of mountains and overlay it with this previous picture. And then the top portion, I can remove that because I don't like where the words are in that picture frame. And I think if I trim all of that down, that will give me a really nice layered landscape to create that foreground, middle ground, and background. Now, I like the little boy and would prefer to have him down here at the bottom of the page, but since in the photograph the top of his foot is cut off, I think what I can do to sort of problem solve that is instead move him up to the very top of the page, where it would make sense for his foot to be trimmed off whenever I trim off the excess. And I also like where I can make him look like his elbow goes behind that mountain and then his arm is reaching forward. Now, a cool trick that I can show you is if you want to make pictures interact together where they look like they really fit and belong together, it's all about how you layer the images. And one cool trick that I can do is if I want this pen to look believable, like he's really holding it, I can cut into his hand where that pen should basically go in between his fingers. And that's going to be a really cool sort of trick that you can play on the viewer where they believe that your collage looks more realistic. So I think I'll sort of experiment with this a little bit and see what works. I may even cut into his thumb a little bit so that way it looks like his thumb is overlapping the pen as well on the other side, just to get it to where it becomes a really believable collage. And learning how to cut through one picture to overlap and insert another picture is a really fun trick with these collages. I sort of like to think of this as a manual mode of something like Photoshop or Illustrator. You're kind of creating what a graphic designer would do, but you're just doing it with scissors instead of a computer and a mouse. And one of the really nice things about this is once all of those parts get glued down, nobody will be able to tell that I've actually cut through those images before to make them fit together. So you can be really creative with your own collages and find some interesting ways to make all of those pictures interact. Now the last thing that I'm going to add is this little line that I took from this logo. It looks like it's a hand-drawn line, and if I make that coming out from the end of the pen, it's going to look like this little kid is sort of drawing on the landscape. So I think that'll be a really nice finished effect. And that gives me a total of 6 different images that have been combined to make this surreal landscape. And so now that I have my format finished, I need to kind of finalize the framing because I want to get rid of that excess and really crop it down to one nice clean rectangle shape. So I'm going to be gluing this onto a sketchbook page. So this is just a page out of my 9x12 sketchbook. You can tear the paper out or leave it in your sketchbook. That's totally up to you. And you'll need either a glue stick or a little bit of liquid glue with a small, inexpensive paintbrush that you can use to spread it out. Either one of those materials will work, and I'll show you how to use both today. I also like to have some scrap paper nearby so I can use that while I'm applying glue to my pictures, and then I can cleanly transfer them to my collage sketchbook paper. So next I'm going to use a ruler and trace out where I want the edges of my collage to be and trim everything down so it fits into that nice clean rectangular format. And then I want to center that on my piece of sketchbook paper. That's going to give it a nice clean presentation, and I'm just going to mark those corners where everything fits together with a pencil and start applying my glue. So I start with the piece that needs to be laid down first and glue it along the edges. If you have a glue stick, you can see where I'm just applying it around the edges and then putting some glue also in the middle and laying it back down where it matches up with those pencil marks, just to make sure everything's going to be nice and even and centered up the way that I want it. If you have any corners that are not glued down or edges, you can just apply a little bit of extra glue just to make sure you get some good adhesion. So next I can start with my second layer and add glue to it as well, figuring out exactly where it needs to go on my collage. And while I'm doing this, I do try to be really careful and make sure that I don't get glue on the outside border of my paper or anywhere on the collage that is going to be facing forward. I try to keep the craftsmanship nice and neat and clean. That's just going to help the overall presentation of your collage. Now, if you're using a liquid glue instead of a glue stick, I want to show you how to use that as well. Using my scrap piece of paper behind me while I work, I'm going to take just a tiny, tiny bit of that glue and brush it on in a very, very thin layer onto my photo. You do not want to use a lot of liquid glue because it will cause your paper to really wrinkle and curl up and cause a bunch of waviness in your collage. So a tiny, tiny bit of glue goes a long way. And you can always take just a tiny bit of glue and touch up any edges that maybe aren't sealed down all the way. Just be really careful to use really small amounts and make sure that you don't get any glue on the front side of your collage. Now I'm going to add in my other elements, making sure here that his foot lines up with the top edge of the collage and his elbow goes behind that mountain. And I'll add in those pieces one at a time. And so you'll sort of notice that it's important for you to glue your collage down in stages where you're gluing the things that need to be in the background first and then gradually sort of working your way to the foreground. And if you need places like his elbow to go behind that mountain, you want to make sure you don't have that part glued down completely so that way it can insert that image back behind it. So now I'm adding the pen, and I do think I want to trim off that top section of the pen. That way it fits with the top edge of the collage. So anything like that, you can just mark that with your pencil and trim it and then add those parts in. Once I've got that added, I can kind of then gradually glue down the different parts of his hand to the pen and the pen to the landscape and try to make sure all of those things feel really believable and are layered the way that I wanted them to be layered when I initially designed this image. Now, one of the things that I really love about these collages is they do force you to think creatively and problem solve in an interesting way and really think outside of the box. I think this is a great way to really get your artistic mind thinking. Now, once you are finished with your collage, if you've used a paintbrush, make sure you wash that really good with soap and water. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, I want you to sign your name. And then in the center, I want you to write Surreal Landscape, so that way you can title your work. If you have a better title name, you're welcome to come up with whatever title you want for this piece.